On a rainy December night, I found my sister and her 3-year-old daughter standing under my porch light, soaked to the bone. At first, I honestly thought somebody's car had broken down nearby. I'd just pulled into my driveway after a 14-hour logistics shift with the Ohio Army National Guard, and my brain felt like wet cement. The rain had been coming down since dinner time. Cold, steady, mean. The kind of Ohio rain that crawls into your joints. Then I saw Laura. She was holding Ava against her chest under a thin gray blanket that was already drenched through. Ava's little pink sneakers had flashing lights in the soles, and every time she shifted her feet on the porch, they blinked weakly in the dark. Laura looked at me the second I stepped out of my truck. Not angry, not dramatic, just broken. "My husband brought his mistress home," she said. Her voice cracked halfway through the sentence. "His mother helped him throw us out." I stood there for maybe 2 seconds, rain dripping off my hood, boots sinking into wet gravel. Then I opened the back door of my truck and said, "Get in. Now it's my turn." Ava climbed in first because kids don't understand pride yet. Laura hesitated. I could see humiliation all over her face. My older sister had spent 15 years trying to build the perfect little suburban life in Beaver Creek, and now she was standing outside my rental house carrying a trash bag full of clothes. I grabbed the bag from her before she could say anything. "Inside," I said. The heat in my house barely worked right. Old duplex near Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Cheap rent, drafty windows, noisy pipes. But it was dry. That mattered. The second Ava got inside, she started crying. Not loud, just exhausted little whimpers. I found one of my old army towels in the laundry basket and wrapped her up while Laura stood frozen near the kitchen table like her body hadn't caught up with what happened yet. "You hungry, baby?" I asked Ava. She nodded without looking at me. I opened a can of Campbell's chicken noodle soup and heated it on the stove while rain tapped against the kitchen window. Laura sat down slowly, staring at nothing. "You want to tell me what happened?" I asked. She laughed once, not because anything was funny, because she was trying not to fall apart. "Brian said we needed to talk." She rubbed both hands over her face. "I thought maybe he was going to admit the affair finally." "The affair you told me wasn't happening." Laura winced. "Yeah, I regretted saying that immediately." Ava sat on my couch wearing giant army socks pulled halfway up her legs while cartoons played softly on my old TV. The poor kid looked shell-shocked. Laura kept talking in pieces. Brian had been seeing a 24-year-old girl named Kelsey from the Honda dealership where he handled fleet construction contracts. Laura found texts 2 months earlier, but Brian convinced her she was paranoid. Then tonight happened. Laura picked Ava up from daycare, came home, and found Kelsey sitting in her kitchen drinking wine from Laura's own glassware like she belonged there. And Patricia, Brian's mother, was standing by the counter holding a spare key. That part made my stomach turn. Patricia had always wrapped herself in church lady kindness. Bible verses on Facebook, Sunday casseroles, soft voice, big smiles. But I never trusted women who enjoyed humiliating other women. "She told me maybe this was God showing me I needed to become a better wife," Laura said quietly. I actually looked away because I was so angry I didn't trust my face. "What did Brian say?" Laura stared at the steam rising from her soup. "He said he was tired of living in chaos." Chaos, that word almost made me laugh. Laura spent 15 years organizing everybody else's life. School pickups, birthday parties, church events, Brian's appointments, bills, meals, Christmas shopping. The woman color-coded grocery lists for fun. Meanwhile, Brian couldn't remember his own daughter's allergy medication half the time. "What about your bank account?" I asked. "He emptied the checking account yesterday." "Joint account," she nodded. "And your cards?" "Canceled." I leaned back in my chair slowly. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just cheating. This was planning. Brian had lined things up carefully. Money first, locks second, public image third. That kind of betrayal doesn't happen in one night. Outside thunder rolled somewhere over Dayton. Ava fell asleep, curled sideways on my couch with her soup bowl still in her lap. Laura stood up quietly to move it before it spilled, and that's when I saw it. A tiny stuffed elephant sticking out of the top of the trash bag she brought over. Dirty, wet, one ear ripped. Ava grabbed it from the lawn, Laura whispered when she saw me looking. Brian tossed some of her things outside. Something cold settled into my chest after that. I'd spent almost 20 years around military logistics, supply chains, inventories, compliance paperwork, federal contracts, people making dumb decisions because they thought nobody was paying attention. A few months earlier, Laura mentioned Brian's construction company landed subcontract work tied to a federally funded veterans housing project near Cincinnati. At the time, I barely listened. Now I remembered every complaint she ever made about his shortcuts. Expired safety training, cash payments, missing receipts, workers getting paid under the table. Back then, it sounded like regular contractor nonsense. Now it sounded different. I looked over at Laura sitting beside her sleeping daughter, and I thought about Brian standing warm inside his house while his child slept in wet clothes under my roof. Some people mistake patience for weakness. That's usually the first bad decision they make. The next morning did not feel like revenge. It felt like cold coffee, 3 phone chargers, and a kitchen table covered in papers. Laura sat in one of my sweatshirts with Ava tucked against her side, watching cartoons. Every few minutes, Laura would pick up her phone, stare at the screen, then put it back down like it might bite her. "Don't text him," I said. "I wasn't." "You were thinking about it." She looked at me with red eyes. "I need my clothes, Megan." "You need a lawyer first." That sounded harsh, and I knew it. But I also knew Brian. Men like him loved a conversation with no witnesses. They loved getting a woman alone, making her cry, then telling everybody she was unstable. So I started with the boring things. I called the daycare and told them Brian was not allowed to pick up Ava until Laura gave written permission. I helped Laura freeze one card, request a new one, and check what little money she had left in her personal account. We took pictures of Ava's wet shoes, the soaked blanket, the trash bag, even the stuffed elephant. Laura hated every second of it. "This feels ugly," she whispered. "It is ugly," I said. "We're just documenting who made it that way." By noon, we were sitting in the waiting area of a legal aid office in downtown Dayton. A vending machine hummed in the corner. Ava ate goldfish crackers out of a plastic bag and leaned against Laura's knee. The woman who helped us was named Denise. She had gray hair, kind eyes, and the tired voice of somebody who had heard too much and still showed up anyway. She told Laura what to save: texts, bank records, social media posts, witness names, any proof of the lockout. Then she said something that made Laura go quiet. "Do not let shame make you polite right now." I wrote that down on the back of an old gas receipt, because it was true. That first week was all survival. I drove Ava to preschool in Kettering before my shift. I picked up groceries at Kroger after work. I slept badly. Laura slept worse. My truck started making a grinding sound every time I shifted into reverse, which was exactly what I needed with my bank account already wheezing. One night I found Laura in my laundry room crying into a basket of towels. "I'm ruining your life," she said. I leaned against the dryer and shut my eyes for a second. Because the truth was, I was tired. I was so tired my bones felt hollow. I had inventory issues at the armory, a commander asking why I looked distracted, and a 3-year-old sleeping on my couch who woke up twice a night asking for her room. But Laura was not ruining my life. Brian had dragged his mess to my door. "You didn't do this," I told her. She shook her head. "I should have seen it." "You did see it. You just kept hoping you were wrong." That made her cry harder, which was not my goal, but sometimes the truth lands badly before it helps. Brian started his performance on day 3. His first Facebook post said, "Sometimes protecting your peace means making painful decisions." Patricia commented underneath it with a heart emoji and a Bible verse about truth. By dinner, 3 women from Laura's church had messaged her asking if she was okay, in that careful way people ask when they already heard a version they liked better. Then Patricia posted, "A godly home cannot survive disrespect." I stared at that one for a long time. Laura wanted to reply. She had her thumbs ready. "Don't," I said. "She's lying." "I know. She's making me look crazy." "I know." "Then why do they get to talk?" I took the phone from her hand gently. "Because loud people leave evidence." That was something I learned in uniform. Angry people talk too much. Arrogant people write things down. Careless people assume nobody is saving screenshots. So we saved everything. Brian kept going. He told neighbors Laura had taken off. He told his buddies she had been depressed. He told one man at church that he was just trying to keep Ava in a stable environment. Stable. That word almost made me put my fist through my own kitchen cabinet. Instead, I waited until Ava was asleep, opened my laptop, and filed a complaint. Not a dramatic one, not emotional, not anonymous revenge poetry. Just facts. Brian's company had done subcontract work on a federally funded veterans housing project near Cincinnati. Laura had seen enough paperwork over the years to know things were off. I knew enough about logistics and compliance to understand which details mattered. Expired safety certifications, cash payments, Material invoices with matching dates but different project codes. Workers listed under one company name while wearing badges from another. I did not accuse him of things I could not prove. I simply pointed the right people toward the right records. Then I waited. And nothing happened. A week passed. Then another. Brian posted pictures of himself at a church pancake breakfast, smiling like a man who had never thrown a child into the rain. Kelsey appeared in the background of one photo wearing sunglasses on top of her head indoors, which told me plenty about her judgment. Meanwhile, Laura was falling apart quietly. She folded Ava's clothes 3 times. She checked her phone at midnight. She asked if maybe she could just talk to Brian once. "I know how that sounds," she said one night. "I was standing at the stove making boxed mac and cheese because we were all too tired for real food." "It sounds human," I said. She looked at me surprised. "I still love him," she whispered. "Not this version, but the one I thought I married." I stirred the noodles and said nothing for a moment. I had judged her for staying. I can admit that now. I thought love should make people braver. But sometimes love makes people explain away things that should scare them. Then came the college account. Laura found it on a Thursday morning. Ava had a little 529 account, nothing huge. Birthday money, Christmas checks, small monthly deposits Laura made when she could. Brian had emptied it 6 months earlier. Laura sat at my kitchen table staring at the screen. "He took her money," she said. Her voice was flat, almost calm. That scared me more than crying. I stood behind her and looked at the transaction history. Every bit of softness I had been trying to preserve inside myself got quieter. Not gone, just quieter. Laura covered her mouth with one hand. Maybe I was stupid. I pulled out the chair beside her and sat down. "No," I said. "You were trusting. He was counting on that." For the first time since she showed up at my door, Laura stopped apologizing. She closed the laptop, wiped her face, and said, "Tell me what we do next." That was when I knew Brian's perfect husband act had started to crack. Not out there. In her. Kelsey started posting videos from Laura's house about 2 weeks after the lockout. Not subtle videos either. Little clips with country music playing in the background while she made coffee in Laura's kitchen or walked through the living room holding wine glasses like she was auditioning for some low-budget reality show. One afternoon, Laura froze halfway through folding laundry. "That's my robe," she said quietly. I looked over from the recliner. Sure enough, Kelsey was standing in front of Brian's bathroom mirror, wearing Laura's old gray robe with the tiny sunflower pattern near the sleeve cuff. The thing that got me wasn't even the robe itself. It was how casual she looked. Like she had stepped into somebody else's life and decided it fit. Laura handed me the phone without another word and walked into the bathroom. A minute later, I heard her crying behind the door, trying not to let Ava hear it. I wanted to hate Kelsey completely. Honestly, I did. She was young, loud online, and dumb enough to confuse attention with happiness. But mostly I hated the way she kept reopening wounds Laura was barely managing to bandage shut. Then she messaged me. Not Laura. Me. The message came around 11 at night, while I was sitting at my kitchen table paying bills with a calculator and 3 overdue notices beside me. "Kelsey, I need to talk to you, alone." I stared at it for a full minute before answering. "Me wrong person." Her response came fast. "Because Brian's lying to you too." That got my attention. I almost ignored her anyway. Then another message came through. "He used my name on paperwork. I think I'm in trouble." I leaned back slowly in my chair. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of my refrigerator and rain tapping softly against the windows again. Ohio in December felt like the sky had one personality setting. I replied before I could overthink it. We met at a Panera Bread in Huber Heights the next afternoon. I told Laura I was running errands because I already knew how she'd react. Maybe that was wrong. Maybe I should have told her first. But I needed information more than I needed moral clarity right then. Kelsey was already there when I arrived. No makeup, hair shoved into a messy bun, oversized sweatshirt, nervous. She looked younger in person, not glamorous, not dangerous, just immature. The second I sat down, she said, "You probably think I'm awful." "I don't think about you enough for that," I replied. Not my kindest moment. But not my worst either. Kelsey looked down at her coffee cup. "He told me they were basically separated. Every cheating man in America says that. I know that now." There was something satisfying about watching reality finally reach her address. Still, I kept my face neutral. "What paperwork?" I asked. Kelsey pulled out her phone and unlocked a folder full of screenshots. Invoices, text messages, photos of forms inside Brian's truck. At first glance, it looked like ordinary contractor chaos. But the more I looked, the worse it got. Brian had been moving money between accounts tied to subcontract work on the Veterans Housing Project. Some invoices listed vendors that barely existed. Others used Kelsey's name and address, even though she had nothing to do with construction. "He said it was temporary," she said quietly. "Like, for taxes or something." I almost laughed at that. Men committing fraud always explained it like they were helping the government organize paperwork. "You signed anything?" "Number." "Good." Kelsey swallowed hard. "Am I going to jail?" I looked at her for a second, and honestly, I didn't know. What I did know was Brian had gotten sloppier since Laura left. Men like him usually did. Once they started winning publicly, they stopped believing consequences applied to them. Kelsey kept talking. Apparently, Brian had been lying to her too. Promising trips he couldn't afford, claiming Laura was emotionally unstable, saying he only stayed in the marriage because he felt guilty about Ava. Then came my favorite part. "He told me you were obsessed with controlling Laura," Kelsey said carefully. I snorted into my coffee before I could stop myself. That man uses the phrase emotionally unstable like Costco sells it in bulk. For the first time all afternoon, Kelsey cracked a tiny smile. Then she showed me the message that changed everything. It was from Patricia. "Move the money through the church outreach account first. Nobody checks donations closely." I read it twice. Patricia had always hidden behind softness, behind casseroles and church bulletins and fake concern, but there it was, clear as day. She wasn't just defending her son, she was helping him. I drove home angry enough to chew nails. Laura was sitting at my kitchen table coloring with Ava when I walked in. The second she saw my face, she knew something happened. "What?" I set my keys down slowly. I met Kelsey. The room went dead quiet. Laura stared at me like I'd slapped her. "You what?" "She had information." "You sat down with her." "She brought evidence." "She slept with my husband." "And your husband committed fraud," I snapped back. Ava looked up from her crayons immediately. Laura lowered her voice fast. "You don't get to decide what hurts worse." That hit me hard because she was right. I rubbed my forehead. "Laura, listen to me. Brian's business records are dirty. Kelsey's name is attached to some of it. Patricia may be involved too. But Laura wasn't hearing strategy. She was hearing betrayal layered on top of betrayal. "You had coffee with the woman living in my house," she whispered. I almost corrected her. Almost reminded her legally it was still her house too. But I knew that wasn't the point. "I'm trying to protect you," I said quietly. Laura laughed, once tired and bitter. "You know what the worst part is? She probably knows more about my husband now than I do." Then she stood up and walked into the bedroom, shutting the door softly behind her. Not slamming it. Honestly, soft hurt is usually worse. That night, after Ava fell asleep, I sat alone in my living room going through screenshots, while an old rerun of Wheel of Fortune played muted on TV. And the more I looked, the clearer it became. Brian hadn't just destroyed his marriage. He'd built his whole life the same way. Shortcuts, lies, image first, consequences later. And eventually, people like that always ran out of road. By January, everything started feeling official in the worst possible way. Not dramatic, not explosive. Just exhausting. The custody paperwork came on a Thursday afternoon in a thick white envelope that looked way too harmless for something capable of ruining your appetite. Laura opened it sitting at my kitchen table while Ava colored snowmen beside her. At first, Laura just stared at the pages silently. Then she handed them to me. Brian was requesting partial custody and claiming Laura had become emotionally unstable, financially reckless, and heavily influenced by an aggressive family member. That aggressive family member was me. I actually laughed for about 2 seconds before the anger hit. "He threw his kid into the rain," I said, "and now suddenly he's father of the year." Laura looked sick. "He wants to punish me." "No," I said quietly, "he wants control back." That's what a lot of people misunderstand about situations like this. Men like Brian don't always panic when you leave. Sometimes they panic when you stop needing their version of reality. The court hearings started 2 weeks later in downtown Dayton. Family court felt nothing like television. Nobody gave speeches. Nobody dramatically objected. Mostly it was tired parents holding paperwork under fluorescent lights while vending machines buzzed in the hallway. The first morning we got there before sunrise because Denise, our legal aid attorney, warned us parking filled up fast. Snow from the night before had turned gray along the sidewalks, and the courthouse coffee tasted like burned dirt. Laura barely touched hers. Brian arrived 20 minutes later wearing a navy wool coat and carrying himself like a man attending a business luncheon instead of a custody hearing. Patricia walked behind him holding a leather Bible against her chest. That almost impressed me, honestly. The commitment to performance. Then Kelsey stepped out of Brian's truck wearing giant sunglasses despite the fact the sky looked like wet cement. I looked at Laura carefully. She saw her too. Laura inhaled slowly through her nose, then looked away without saying a word. That was growth, painful growth, but still. Inside the courtroom, Brian's attorney introduced himself as Randall Pierce. Mid-60s, expensive watch, calm voice. The kind of man who could probably make tax fraud sound patriotic if given enough billable hours. He smiled at me once. Not warmly, professionally, which somehow felt worse. The hearing itself made me understand why people give up. Brian sat there talking about stability, while Laura quietly twisted tissues apart in her lap. Patricia dabbed fake tears from the corners of her eyes every few minutes like she was rehearsing for community theater. Then Brian said something that made my jaw tighten so hard it hurt. I'm concerned about the emotional environment my daughter is being exposed to. Emotional environment, that from the man who dumped Ava's stuffed elephant into the rain. I wanted to stand up right there. But Denise touched my sleeve lightly without even looking at me. Don't. That's what the touch meant. So I stayed quiet. And honestly, that might have been the hardest part of this whole thing. Military training wires you to solve problems. Move fast. Take action. Protect your people. But family court punishes emotion, especially from women. Especially from women in uniform. One wrong outburst, and suddenly Brian's attorney would be talking about aggression and instability too. So I sat there listening while strangers reduced my sister's life into bullet points. At one point, the judge approved temporary supervised visitation while the case continued. Laura looked shattered. Brian looked relieved. I looked at the ceiling because I honestly thought I might say something career-ending otherwise. Outside the courtroom, Laura finally broke. "This is insane," she whispered. "He lies and everybody acts like it's equal." Denise sighed softly beside us. "Family court moves carefully because children are involved." Laura laughed bitterly. "Children are already involved." That line stayed with me. As we walked toward the parking garage, somebody called my last name. "Sergeant Carter." I turned around. Randall Pierce stood a few feet away with his gloves tucked under one arm. Laura stiffened beside me immediately. Pierce looked at her politely. "I'm not here to discuss the case." Then what I asked. He studied me for a second. "You worked logistics oversight during deployment support contracts." I frowned. "Years ago." He nodded slowly, thought I recognized the name. Turns out, before becoming a divorce attorney, Pierce handled military subcontract compliance cases years earlier. Not closely with me, but enough to recognize the Carter name attached to Ohio Guard Logistics. Small world. Or maybe just small state. "What do you want?" I asked. His expression changed slightly then. Less lawyer, more tired older man. "Your brother-in-law has larger problems developing," he said quietly. "I'd advise you not to involve yourself emotionally any further than you already have." Laura looked between us, confused. I crossed my arms. "Is that a threat?" Number Pierce glanced toward the courthouse doors. "It's practical advice." Then he walked away. That conversation bothered me more than I admitted. Because he didn't sound protective of Brian. He sounded resigned, like a man watching somebody drive toward a cliff at full speed. The next few weeks dragged. Court dates got delayed. Paperwork moved slowly. Laura cried less, but she also laughed less. Sometimes she sat awake at night staring at nothing while old sitcom reruns played softly in the background. Meanwhile, I started losing my own balance a little. I snapped at a young specialist during inventory after he mislabeled supply bins. The kid looked stunned because I never raised my voice like that. Later, I apologized. Still felt bad. One night, my commander pulled me aside after drill weekend and asked if everything was okay at home. That scared me more than I expected, because I realized Brian's mess was leaking into parts of my life I'd always kept clean and organized. Then came the parking lot. The supervised visit had ended badly. Ava clung to Laura crying because Brian promised to take her home soon and she didn't understand why she couldn't go. Laura finally got her buckled into the car seat while snow flurries drifted through the freezing air. Then Ava asked softly from the back seat, "Mommy, did Daddy forget me?" Laura made this sound I hope I never hear again as long as I live. Not loud crying. Just pain leaving somebody's body all at once. I climbed into the back seat beside Ava while Laura leaned against the steering wheel sobbing. And sitting there in that freezing parking garage listening to my sister break apart piece by piece, I realized something ugly about revenge. Even when you win, some damage stays permanent. That night, after everybody went to sleep, I sat alone at my kitchen table with a legal pad beside me. At the top, I wrote 4 words. Do it clean, carefully. Then underneath that, one more. Do not become him. By March, Ohio finally started thawing out. Dirty snow piles disappeared from parking lots. People opened windows again. The world looked softer. None of us felt softer. Brian's problems had started leaking into public view by then, even if nobody was saying everything out loud yet. His construction company lost one subcontract quietly. A supplier filed a payment complaint. Rumors moved through church circles and contractor circles at the same time, which in Ohio are basically neighboring zip codes. Still, Brian kept performing normal. That's the thing about men like him. They think confidence can outlive facts. The Veterans Charity Banquet happened on a Friday night in Cincinnati at one of those downtown hotels that always smells faintly like coffee and carpet cleaner. Laura almost didn't go. A legal aid volunteer had invited her weeks earlier through a support network for military and veteran families. Denise thought it would help Laura reconnect with people outside the disaster her life had become. But the second Laura found out Brian's company was sponsoring one of the event tables, she wanted to back out. I can't do this, she told me while standing in my hallway holding a pair of earrings she never ended up wearing. I'm too tired. I understood that. Being hurt is exhausting. People forget that part. I adjusted the collar of my black coat and looked at her carefully. We're not going there for him. Laura laughed weakly. Feels like he's everywhere. I stepped closer and lowered my voice. Then let him be everywhere. We're still walking in. That got her moving. The ballroom looked exactly how those events always look. Round tables, tiny desserts nobody actually wants, flags near the stage, veterans in old dress uniforms talking too loudly after 2 bourbons. For the first hour, things stayed peaceful. Laura actually smiled once talking to an older Marine couple from Kentucky. Ava stayed home with Denise's niece, thank God. That child had already seen enough adults behaving badly. Then Brian walked in. Dark gray suit, American flag lapel pin. That same polished smile he used when he wanted people to believe he was a decent man. Patricia floated beside him wearing pearls and carrying herself like she personally invented prayer. And about 10 feet behind them came Kelsey. Not with Brian. Alone. Interesting. I felt Laura tense immediately beside me. You okay? I asked quietly. No, she answered honestly, but I'm standing. That might have been the bravest thing she said the entire year. Brian spotted us near the coffee station. You could actually see the surprise flash across his face for half a second before he covered it with charm. Then he walked over. Laura, he said smoothly, like they'd bumped into each other at Target instead of family court. You look good? Laura didn't answer. Brian turned toward me. Megan. I nodded once. He glanced around the ballroom. Didn't expect to see you 2 here. That makes 3 of us, I replied. Patricia stepped forward with that fake soft church voice I'd grown to hate. We should all try to behave peacefully tonight. I looked directly at her. You threw your granddaughter into the rain. Her smile disappeared instantly. Good. Before anybody could answer, Kelsey approached, holding a glass of water with both hands, like she needed something to steady herself. Brian's jaw tightened. Kelsey, he said sharply. Relax, she muttered. I'm not here for you. That was when I noticed 2 men in dark suits entering through the side doors near the registration area. Not police. Not dramatic. Just calm. One older, one younger, both carrying folders. A woman wearing a project compliance badge walked with them. Brian saw them too. And for the first time since I met him, I watched confidence leave his face completely. One of the men approached politely. Mr. Holloway, we need a few minutes of your time. Several nearby conversations slowed immediately. Brian forced a smile. Now, it won't take long. Patricia stepped forward fast. There must be some misunderstanding. Nobody answered her. Brian glanced toward the ballroom exits like he was calculating distance. Then he looked directly at me. And that's when he made his final mistake. You did this? He snapped loudly. A few nearby heads turned. I stayed calm. Did what? This whole thing. His voice kept rising. You couldn't stand seeing your sister fix her marriage, so you kept poisoning her against me. Laura stared at him in disbelief. Fix it, she whispered. But Brian was unraveling now. You've always acted like you're better than everybody because you wear a uniform, he continued, pointing at me. You think you can bully people. Several veterans at nearby tables looked over at that. Not in agreement, in annoyance. The older investigator spoke carefully. Sir, let's continue this conversation privately. But Brian ignored him. Patricia grabbed Brian's sleeve. Lower your voice. Then she made her mistake too. That money was supposed to help the church outreach program, she hissed. You said nobody would look that closely. Silence. Not movie silence. Real silence. The kind where silverware stops moving. One donor near the stage slowly lowered his drink. The younger investigator looked at Patricia. Excuse me. Patricia's face drained white immediately. Brian turned toward her in horror. And then Kelsey, nervous, angry, shaking, finally exploded. He used my name on fake invoices, she blurted out. You told me it was temporary. Brian rounded on her instantly. You stupid little, Laura said. Not loud, but sharp enough to cut through the entire room. Everybody looked at her. And for the first time all night, Brian looked uncertain. Laura stood slowly from her chair. You know what the saddest part is? She asked him quietly. I spent years thinking if I loved you enough, you'd eventually love us the same way back. Brian opened his mouth, probably searching for another performance. Then he ruined himself completely. I only fought for custody because I knew it would hurt you, he snapped. The words landed like a gunshot. Even Patricia looked stunned. One of the older veterans near the stage muttered, Jesus Christ. Brian realized too late what he'd admitted out loud. Laura's face changed then. Not dramatic, not triumphant, just finished. Completely finished. She reached for her coat calmly. I stood beside her. And together, we walked toward the ballroom doors while the investigators continued talking behind us. Outside, cold rain had started falling again across Cincinnati. Laura stopped under the hotel awning and let out one long breath. I kept waiting for him to admit what he did, she said quietly. Cars hissed past on wet pavement nearby. I looked back once through the glass doors. Brian stood surrounded by people who no longer looked impressed by him. Then I looked at my sister. No, I said. You needed everybody else to stop pretending they didn't see it. For the first time in months, Laura nodded without crying. About 8 months after Laura showed up at my door in the rain, life finally stopped feeling like survival every single day. Not perfect, just steadier. Honestly, I learned there's a difference. Laura found a small 2-bedroom apartment in Kettering above a dentist's office. The carpet was older than both of us combined, and the kitchen drawers stuck whenever humidity rolled in, but it was clean and quiet. Most importantly, nobody inside it lied to her. Ava got her own room again. That mattered more than anything. The first night after moving in, Laura sent me a picture of Ava asleep under glow-in-the-dark stars, taped crooked across the ceiling. One tiny hand clutching that same stuffed elephant Brian tossed into the yard months earlier. Laura texted home. I stared at that word for a long time before answering. Meanwhile, Brian's world kept shrinking. Not all at once. That's another thing people get wrong about consequences. Most of the time they arrive slowly, like water damage. Quiet at first, then suddenly everything smells rotten. His company lost the veterans housing subcontract completely. Then another contractor cut ties with him. The fraud investigation dragged on for months, but enough details became public that people stopped returning his calls. Church friends got distant. Parents at Ava's preschool avoided eye contact during pickup days. Even Patricia's social circle cooled off after questions started spreading about church outreach money and accounting misunderstandings. Nobody needed a dramatic public shaming anymore. The truth had already done the work. I heard through Denise that Brian was still trying to blame everybody else. Laura. Kelsey. Me. Government overreach. Liberal contractors. Stress. Apparently, accountability had become a group project. Kelsey disappeared from the story not long after the banquet. Last I heard, she moved to Lexington and started working at another dealership. I didn't forgive her exactly, but I also stopped wasting energy hating her. Some people are villains. Some are just weak enough to follow one. There's a difference. Laura slowly started looking like herself again around summer. Not immediately. Healing in your 40s looks different than healing in your 20s. Older women don't always bounce back loudly. Sometimes they just start sleeping through the night again. Sometimes they laugh at commercials. Sometimes they stop checking their phone every 10 minutes waiting for another cruel message. One Saturday morning, I stopped by her apartment after drill weekend carrying coffee and sausage biscuits from a place near Wright-Patterson. Ava opened the door wearing mismatched socks. "Aunt Megan," she yelled before crashing into my legs. Laura stood behind her, smiling softly. Real smile this time. Not survival smiling. I looked around the apartment. Second-hand furniture. A tiny bookshelf. Construction paper taped to the refrigerator. Peace. That's all it was. Just peace. And honestly, after the year we'd had, it looked expensive. "You finally fixed your truck?" Laura asked while handing me coffee. "Mostly." The transmission repair wiped out nearly every extra dollar I had saved. For months, I'd been driving to the guard armory praying reverse still worked. Laura frowned. "You shouldn't have carried us financially that long." I shrugged. That's what family's for. But later that night, driving home along I-675 with classic rock playing softly through my speakers, I admitted something to myself I hadn't wanted to say out loud. The whole thing changed me too. Not just Laura. Me. I became sharper, less patient, more suspicious. There were moments during those months when revenge mattered to me more than sleep, more than peace, maybe even more than happiness. That scared me a little. Because bitterness is sneaky. It doesn't arrive waving flags. It arrives sounding reasonable. You deserve payback. You deserve anger. You deserve to watch somebody suffer. And maybe sometimes you do. But living there too long changes you. A few weeks later, Laura and I sat on lawn chairs outside her apartment building, while Ava chased lightning bugs across the grass with 2 other kids from the neighborhood. The Ohio air felt warm for once. Somebody nearby was grilling burgers. You could hear crickets starting up in the trees. Laura looked over at me quietly. "Do you think bad people ever really pay for what they do?" I thought about Brian sitting alone somewhere blaming the world. Thought about Patricia losing the admiration she treated like oxygen. Thought about Ava asking if her father forgot her. Then I answered honestly, "Not always the way we want." Laura waited. I took a sip of iced tea. Some people never apologize. Some never admit what they destroyed. But eventually people like Brian lose access to good people. And that ends up costing them more than they expect. Laura nodded slowly. "I used to think leaving meant losing," she admitted. I watched Ava laughing in the grass. "No," I said quietly. "Sometimes leaving is the first time you choose yourself." We sat there a while after that without talking. And for the first time in nearly a year, silence didn't feel heavy. Later that night, Ava fell asleep on Laura's couch, wearing oversized army socks again, curled up under a faded blanket, while an old Disney movie played quietly in the background. Laura covered her gently, then looked over at me. "Thank you," she whispered. I shook my head. "No more thanking people for loving you." That made her cry a little. But not the broken kind anymore. Just the kind that happens when somebody finally feels safe. If you've ever had to rebuild after betrayal, I hope you remember this kindness and self-respect can exist together. You can love people deeply and still refuse to let them destroy your peace. Sometimes walking away isn't weakness at all. Sometimes it's the moment your real life finally begins.